In this video, I'm going to review a bike that's a little bit different from the standard fare. That's right, a mountain bike. I'm going to talk about the Pine Mountain 2 from Marin, find out what I like and dislike about it in this video. Welcome back, Pathless Peddlers, and if you're new to the channel, if you're into the non-competitive side of cycling, gravel exploring, riding party pace, you have found your people, hit that subscribe button. So this year I thought I would start to shake things up on the channel and start to look at some mountain bikes. Fair warning, I'm a complete noob when it comes to mountain biking. So that is a perspective I'm going to be reviewing mountain bikes from. So a novice mountain biker and also someone that is looking for the best bang for buck. The Pine Mountain 2 really caught my eye, especially after I reviewed the Nicasio Plus by Marin, which last year took the award of Best Budget Supple Bike. And that really got me curious about the Pine Mountain 2. The Pine Mountain is a steel hardtail built around big and supple 29er tires. In this case, 29 by 2.6 inches to be exact. So lots of suppleness in the tire department. It's also got a lot of mounts, tons of mounts, probably the most number of the mounts on any bike I've ever seen. It's got a whole matrix of mounts in the frame with the idea that you could get a custom bag made and you could attach it to the frame without using any Velcro straps. Probably more importantly, it also has rear rack mounts. So if you're a shorter rider like myself and can't run a seat bag because you just don't have that tire to saddle clearance, they make it really easy to attach a rack back there. The bike has a fork with 120 millimeters of travel as well as a dropper post and has probably the most modern geometry in a mountain bike that I have personally ridden. So a pretty slack 66.5 head tube angle and a pretty steep 74.5 seat tube angle. The chainstays are also relatively short for the mountain bike world at 430. One of the more interesting components on the bike is actually the handlebar, which is custom to Marin, and it's got a nice 10-degree swept back, which I totally appreciated. I'm the kind of rider that can't really ride on a purely flat handlebar for very long. It just aggravates my carpal tunnel, and is actually why I prefer drop bars. But bars with a little bit of sweep, like the ones that they have on the Pine Mountain 2, really alleviate that wrist pain and makes it more enjoyable to ride for much longer. You'll notice the handlebar also has a little crossbar, and that's actually a pretty nice addition because it makes it really easy to mount bike packing bags to. I found that handlebars with a swept back become a little bit trickier when you try to mount bags to them because it interferes with the cable, but because there is that flat central piece, easy to mount a bag without having to thread it through all sorts of cabling. So how does the bike ride? First off, a little bit more about myself. I am 5'8" on a good day, so I tend to ride slightly smaller frames, and the Pine Mountain I rode was the size small. Prior to riding the Pine Mountain, the mountain bikes I'm most familiar with are the older Salsa El Mariachi and the Jones Complete SWB bike. So not a ton of data points in terms of comparing it to other mountain bikes, but I will try my best. So for me, one thing I really liked about the Pine Mountain was actually the fit. If you like a short reach and a pretty upright riding posture, then the Pine Mountain will work for you. In fact, it reminded me a lot of the Jones bike, which I reviewed and ultimately bought because it was such a good fit. I also found that I really liked that steeper 74.5 seat tube angle. It really puts me on top of the cranks and is great for the climbs we have out here in Montana. So generally speaking, the riding position is pretty upright, much more so than the El Mariachi I used to own and really similar to the Jones bike, which I currently own. I took the Marin on mostly green and blue trails, and for me, it was the perfect bike for those conditions. I love the swept back bars. It was really easy to move behind the saddle and steer with your hips and go through the corners. And this bike just rolled over everything. It felt really stable. It made me feel more confident riding trails where on the El Mariachi, I was a little bit more skittish on. So for me, right off the bat, I love the handling, very reminiscent of the Jones bike, but with suspension. So that was going downhill. How did it go uphill? Well, this is where, things weren't always so great. I felt like it climbed reasonably well. Seated with a load on the bike, it didn't get too floppy. I think the wider handlebar and the sweep really kind of helped counteract the typical high trail flop. But the biggest thing I noticed while riding the bike going uphill, especially is the weight. This is not a light bike. In fact, it makes my Jones bike feel like a much lighter bike. On my scale, with pedals and a bottle cage, the bike weighed in at about 36 pounds. So while that was fun going downhill and probably added to the stability of the bike, going uphill, you really felt it. It wasn't a bike that really called out to you to sprint or do short, intense efforts, but it seemed to reward a much more chill riding style. So I didn't get a chance to really take it on a bike packing trip just because COVID, but I did load it up with my bike packing gear and rode around the local hills and trails here. On flat terrain, it wasn't a problem. It was a little tricky to tuck in from the wind because the bars are so wide and it is a fairly short reach. Going downhill was a blast. It rolled over everything. Felt like it's the kind of bike that wants you to steer with your hips and use some body English. And for me, as a relatively newbie mountain biker, I appreciated the front end handling and geometry. I think climbing is where the bike suffered most, not so much from the body position, actually, because I do prefer being on top of the crank, but it was really the weight. It was just kind of a drag going uphill. I think overall it has the excellent beginnings of a bike packing bike. You know, it's got all the mounts. I know for some, the adventure nipples in the frame are a little excessive. I don't mind it. I think it's kind of just fun, but I definitely do appreciate the rear rack mounts in the back. You can add a rack there without having to get any proprietary adapters or anything, which is great if you are a shorter rider. So I think overall, I really like how this bike handles. I just wish it weighed about 5 to 6 pounds less because otherwise it would just be an awesome bike. Maybe an aluminum rendition of this same exact geometry and everything could make that happen. But as it is, I just really struggle with that extra weight. And once you throw bike packing gear into the mix, unless you're super fit or aren't riding in a really mountainous, hilly area, then that could take a little bit away from the ride experience. As a trail bike, it's not so bad, although noticeable. I'm almost willing to forgive the weight as a trail bike just because it is so much fun going downhill, but man, you gotta work for those uphills. So that's what I think. What do you guys think about the Pine Mountain 2? Does it have too many mounts? Is there anyone here riding it today? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, keep the supple side down.